There are so many of us committed to improving the lives of the youth in our communities. The In It for Youth podcast is a place for us to come together, from professionals who work with and serve youth to those that champion issues affecting children, to community advocates and stakeholders, and insightful young minds too. The In It for Youth podcast is a tapestry of voices united by a dedication to youth well-being and empowering the young generations of today and tomorrow. I'm your host, Jamie Gale, and I'm so glad you've joined me on this team that is in it for youth. Hello, and welcome back to the podcast. If you, like me, have or work with kids in the teen years or will soon, today's conversation will be especially important. There are so many resources out there about the development of young kids, which is so wonderful and important. But for those of us who work with or have our own older kids, like I do, information and guidance can be hard to find. And so I'm really excited to dig in with my guest today. I'm joined today by Dr. Melanie McNally, author, licensed clinical psychologist, and brain coach who has worked in the mental health field since 2005. She's written 2 books, The Emotionally Intelligent Teen and Helping Your Unmotivated Teen, and she is nationally recognized for her work. Dr. McNally has been invited to the White House to discuss the importance of teen mental health and has appeared in publications such as The Huffington Post, Parents Magazine, Business Insider, and Fast Company. Congratulations on all of your impact on youth well-being, Dr. McNally, and welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me.
I'm really looking forward to talking to you about your books and your path to this point, but I'd love to start with an overall look of what your work looks like these days. Are there buckets that you are working in these days, or kind of what does a picture of your work life look like right now?
Yes, it's a good question because I'm always shifting and changing things around based on just my own interests and my own life. Coaching and writing are my 2 main buckets. And with coaching, I kind of divided up. So about half of my roster is coaching teens and working with their parents. And then the other half is working with highly ambitious, big time achieving execs. So adults where they're just really ambitious and have very significant goals that they're trying to reach. So it's very different than my work with teens, but I kind of like that because it keeps my day very interesting. But my specialty and my area of expertise is working with teens and young adults. So I do a lot of virtual coaching with all of my clients. I do writing because I'm a regular contributor for Psychology Today, and then I'm working on another book. So I do a lot of writing as well, and then some speaking engagements too that I do around my books.
Awesome. For the coaching, do you tend to have people meet with you multiple times? Like, kind of what does working with you in that way look like?
It depends because sometimes I have like resistant teens who are resistant to coaching. So we might just start with 5 sessions to see how it goes. But most people stay with me long term, like 6 months, a year, even longer than that, just kind of depending on what it is that we're working on. I like to usually have people plan on 6 months because I know we're really going to be able to get a lot of work done in 6 months. But then people find like, okay, we did so much in 6 months. I want to see what we can do in the next 6. And so then we'll just keep going and keep going.
Okay, cool. So I think I probably have an idea because I've done a deep dive on you already. But for the listeners that are just getting to know you, what are some of the main things when you say like what you're working on with them? Like, what are some of the things that you're working on with these teens?
Oftentimes parents come to me because they're saying my teen is really lazy. They don't want to do anything. They're just on their phones all day. And so part of what I'm doing is helping teens really get in touch with what they're curious about, what they're passionate about, helping them create a purpose. And then once we have that, now we can create meaningful goals so that it's goals that are really rooted in what they want and what they're interested in. It's not like my agenda that I'm putting on them. It's not the parents' agenda. It's helping them create those meaningful goals and then getting that roadmap down. And then I'm their accountability partner. I'm there to make sure that they're following through on things and that they're building that grit muscle, that they're not giving up when it gets boring or when it gets really hard. For each individual, the goals are going to be a little bit different, but a lot of times it's around figuring out what they want to major in college, figuring out where they want to go to college. For a lot of high schoolers, it's things around developing friend groups friendships or having a best friend or improving their grades or just figuring out what they value.
This is maybe a little bit of a nuanced question, but is the concept of it being coaching, because it sounds like there's probably a lot of overlap with therapy and you are both, right? So I guess how do you delineate where the line, how do you navigate sort of that both and or neither? I'm not sure. Yeah.
Yes. So what I do is coaching. I used to do therapy and I got burnt out on therapy because I was really frustrated in working with teens for two reasons. One is I couldn't have in between session support with them, because in therapy you have to have very clear boundaries. And then also I couldn't communicate with their parents as much as I wanted to. So when I realized that those were the two things that were burning me out in therapy, I started thinking about like, what would it look like if I were to do those two things? And then I realized like, okay, if I did coaching, I can actually do these two things. And so when teens come to me, they know that their parent is going to get a progress report after every session. And they're aware of this. So it's full transparency. There's no secrets or gossip or anything behind the scenes. So the parent gets a progress report after each session, like an overview, letting them know this is what we worked on. This is what their homework is for the week. And this is how you can support them. And then parents can also get in touch with me at any point. They can schedule their own parent support sessions. They can text me or email me and just say, hey, just a heads up, like this isn't going so well, or they had this major success and they might be too embarrassed to tell you or whatever. And so that helps a lot because teens don't exist in a vacuum. I need parents to be involved and to know what we're doing. And then also with the in-between session support, I can text my clients. I can send them voice notes. We can DM each other on Instagram. Like I can send them memes, I can send them a podcast episode and be like, hey, I heard this and was thinking of you. And so then that helps a lot. And they can even get in touch with me if they get stuck on something. So maybe there was something specific they're supposed to work on that week and they got stuck. We don't have to wait until the next week. They can actually just text me and be like, hey, this is what happened. What do I do? And I can guide them through it. And so now we're not losing any ground. So I'm very clear that we're doing coaching, we're not doing therapy. And then if there is something that comes up where maybe I'm seeing symptoms of depression, maybe symptoms of an eating disorder, things that would be more on the therapeutic level, then I'll talk with the parent and the client about other resources that they can utilize because I want to make sure I stay in the coaching realm.
That's really cool. I mean, I on many levels, one, just for the teen, like what a huge opportunity to build a relationship with them, which I'm sure you can do. I mean, therapists can also do that really beautifully, but it's in next level sort of in this way. But then also I'm thinking from a career standpoint, our listenership is people who are committed to youth well-being. And so we have a lot of people who are either trying to or have taken like a specific type of work with kids and adapted it to kind of fit in their life. And so I really love to hear how you did that. It's really inspiring because even like, let's say classroom teachers, we have a lot of people that are classroom teachers and they're burnt out because of the infrastructure, because of the bureaucracy, because of the limitations that come from all different areas and the expectations. And so your story is encouraging to them about how you can take the things that you love about work and then get creative with it and find other ways to accomplish the same thing, but without the same restrictions.
Yes. I mean, I was at the point where I was considering like, I'm done. I was so burnt out. I was just like, I'm ready. Like the pandemic really pushed me over the edge where I was just like, I'm done. I'm not going to do therapy anymore. I'm leaving like the mental health field altogether. But when I really broke it down, I was like, but I really love what I do. And I love working with teens. I love it. There's so many elements. So then, I just kind of dissected it and had to think of what do I love? What do I want to leave behind? And then what would that look like? And is it possible? And so, I think anything really is possible for teachers and educators and other clinicians out there. And it's just making it unique to what fits you best.
I love it. We've started to kind of touch on your path to this point. You went to college, you became a psychologist, and now you're here. So can you kind of take us through your career path to this point?
Oh goodness, my career path is not linear at all.
I didn't think it was going to be. Yeah.
It's funny when I graduated from high school, my major initially when I went off to college was fisheries and wildlife.
Oh,
I
wow.
wanted to be a wildlife biologist. I wanted to live in the woods and watch bears eat from
Oh,
rivers. And that's how I imagined my life would be. And then I started taking fisheries and wildlife classes. I was like, oh, this is a lot of work in a lab. This is not what I was thinking at all. So I transitioned over into counseling because I always did have an interest. I actually was thinking I wanted to be a high school counselor until I shadowed one and saw, like teachers and high school counselors who are on the front lines dealing with things on a daily basis. So I really I thought like this isn't probably the best fit for me. It's not what I was necessarily thinking I wanted to do. So I went to graduate school because I graduated with a degree in psychology. And then I went to graduate school for counseling and just thinking I wanted to work in the field of counseling. But in between there was a lot of fun. At one point, I moved to San Francisco and worked lots of different jobs and got to see people on different life paths and got a lot of exposure to a lot of different ways of being in the world. And then I worked in the field for a bit, mostly with adults with severe mental illness and working in community mental health. And then I went back to get my doctorate in clinical psychology. And that's when I started to really hone in on adolescence. So I kind of tried things out, went off the beaten path quite a bit for a while, came back. I feel like I'm still trying things out and trying things on.
it's the best way to do it, right? I had a similar swerve at the beginning of college. When I was in high school, I thought that I was going to be president, like of the United States, because that's exactly what and at age 17, 18, I thought I was going to be until I started taking poli-sci classes in college. And that year was the Bush Gore election with all the hanging chads and all of that. And I was like, oh, this is dirty. I don't want any part of this. So I had a similarly winding path, but yeah, like you, I'm sort of back to the things that light me up, working with kids and camp and supporting people getting to their goals. So yeah, I can relate to your story. So when did the decision to become an author fit into this? And we're going to talk about your books in just a minute, but how did becoming an author fit into this?
I've always loved writing. It's always been a part of my life. Like I started the school newspaper at my middle school. My dad did a lot of freelance writing. It was just always a part of me. And my oldest sister writes a lot, does a lot of freelance writing. So I've just always enjoyed writing. It's just been a part of my life. But I never really thought of it as like something I could make money by or how it would fit in with anything. And initially what happened was I had this idea for a novel come to me one day and it literally just like flowed out of me where I just sat down at the laptop. I could not stop. It was like 3 solid days where the story just came out. It was a novel that I wrote for teens. It was based on a lot of my work that I was doing as a therapist at the time. I spent quite a bit of time editing it and working on it, and I just self-published it on Amazon. So it still lives on there. It's called Counting Dragonflies. And then I created a workbook to go along with it because the story is this girl who hates everything about herself and her life. And there's a lot of family conflict. And she ends up running away from home to find her aunt living in the Montana wilderness. And through her whole journey, she learns how to tune into her inner voice and how to love herself. So I pulled out a lot of the concepts that she was learning along the way. And then I made like a separate workbook to go along with it, so that when they're reading the novel, they can actually do some of the exercises themselves. I hired an artist to do it and make it look really beautiful. And then I just self-published it on Amazon. And then that was it. I just kind of put it out there. And I barely even tell anybody about it to this day. Like it just lives out there. But then I found that I just kept kind of going back to like writing things. And I was actually on a podcast talking about some of my work, and I had an editor reach out to me and say, hey, we think you have a lot to say and it sounds really valuable. Would you be interested in writing for, and it's New Harbinger, which is a really big publishing house. And she's like, would you be interested in writing a book for us? And so then I wrote my first book, The Emotionally Intelligent Teen, my first like officially published book with them. And then that led to me getting picked up by Psychology Today to be a regular contributor. And then it led to another book. And so now writing has kind of just become more of a paid norm, which is really cool.
Oh, I love that so much. And if you could send me the link to the one that you self-published too, I think that there's a lot of people that I could share that with. We can link that in the show notes. I think that that's really beautiful and perhaps a way for people to dip their toes into that world, in a way, if somebody's not ready to go and sign up with a provider to start, but feel some self-efficacy with some of the tools. So I would love to share that with people. So let's talk about your most recent book, although it sounds like you've got one in the works, but the one that's published, Helping Your Unmotivated Teen. The name of this really grabbed my attention because I think that feels like such I don't know what to do about this for anybody that's dealing with it, either from the education standpoint or parenting standpoint. And so can you first start by giving listeners the elevator pitch to what this book is, and then we'll dig into it a little bit more?
Yes. So this book came from the idea of something where parents come to me constantly saying, my teen is lazy. And what I realized is it's not that their teen is lazy, it's that they're lacking motivation. And a lot of parents don't understand what motivation is made up of, that it consists of 3 different skill sets: drive, grit, and goals. And so, what this book does is it helps parents understand the components of motivation. They can almost self diagnose which area their teen is lacking in. And then it gives them some tools and exercises that they can use with their teen to help them in the area that they're struggling.
I like that framework a lot. So, I know you said that it's not that they're lazy, it's that they lack motivation. So what is an unmotivated teen? What does this look like? Let's just start there. So if some parent is I don't know if my kid is lazy or unmotivated or whatever, what does that look like?
So motivation, it's made of the 3 skill sets. So we've got drive, grit, and goals. And drive is when a teen, maybe they don't have curiosities, they're not passionate about something, they don't have a lot of purpose, then we know that they don't have that internal drive in place yet. Their grit is their ability to stick with something even when it's really hard or really boring. So some teens have a lot of passion, they have a lot of things that they're interested in, but they get distracted really quickly, or they give up when it gets really hard or when it gets repetitive. So then we know that they're struggling with the grit area. And then the last area is goals. So having that roadmap to follow and knowing what steps to take. Because some teens, again, they know what they're passionate about. Maybe they are good at sticking with things even when it gets hard, but because they haven't really mapped it out, they're kind of jumping around, or they get really confused, or they're easily thrown off track. And then some teens will struggle with all of the areas like drive, grit, and goals. I don't really even like to say that teens are lazy because I don't think that's fair.
Yeah.
I almost think that any parent who's thinking that their teen is lazy should almost just think of it as they're just lacking in motivation.
One of the things that I'm a child of the 80s and 90s. And so I feel like the vibe then was much more about outcome and pressure to perform, pressure to go to the very specific college, get a major that was impressive. There's a lot of external pressure on kids and teens at that age. And then I feel like we've had this huge pendulum swing to, accept kids where they are and not make them feel pressured. And I think that there's a almost fear in some of my parenting cohort that is we don't want to put pressure on the kids, but it's got to be somewhere in there, right? And so I'm just curious, if you're a parent of a teen, are there any tidbits that you could give us that help us determine when to push the kid towards a goal? Let's just say a goal at all, right? Sometimes kids are just happy to be playing video games all day and whatever. When to nudge their kid and when to just accept where their kid is at. Or let's say the kid is happy getting, C's and B's or whatever it is. And in our minds, oh, we want them to do better in school. How does a parent navigate that dynamic of when to push and when to accept and support? And I know that's a big question, but I that can be really hard. So I'm just curious. Yeah.
It is a tricky area for parents to navigate, and to think of it as a spectrum too, where it doesn't always have to be one or the other. It doesn't always have to be like 100% push or 100% letting them be. We can think of it as a spectrum where there might be varying levels, and thinking of what a teen's typical week looks like. Because sometimes if you think of it on a daily basis, it can be, okay, my teen all day today, all they've done is just like lay on their phone and scroll. And then we might really want to push, but it could be because they have a really busy week coming up and they have a ton going on, or they have a really stressful presentation, or they have something going on with their friend group. And so this is how they're decompressing, which, by the way, that's another side note. We want to teach them how to decompress and self-regulate in other ways besides using their phones, because that is a huge complaint I hear from teens. They will tell me, like, literally, I don't know how to relax without my phone. We need to be teaching them how to do that without their phones. But that's just a side note. Sorry.
Yeah, no, that's a whole, we could dig right into that topic too.
Yes, that would be a whole other thing. But we do want to think of it as like, okay, if they have a lot going on in that week, then thinking of like the week overall as being balanced. So there might be some days where we are going to let them be, and other days we are going to push them a little bit harder based on their schedule, rather than thinking of it as like a moment to moment or day to day kind of a thing.
Okay, that does make sense. Yeah, I mean, we don't need to go way down the phone rabbit hole, but to your point, my kids, so I have 2 in high school this year, and they've always had a no phones policy in the classroom, technically, but they have never enforced it until this year. And they started on day 1 of school with this extremely strict policy. And it turns out that it was actually that the school was coming down on the teachers. And so like if they walked in and saw a teacher not enforcing, then the teacher faced some sort of ramification. And so that just dominoed into the teachers enforcing the rule with the kids. Anyway, both of my kids were like, I don't know what to do in a class, like in the downtime, in the in between, whether it was, that's how they were soothing their anxiety or fidgeting. And so it was like an immediate, like, oh, I need to bring like paper and markers to color, or I need to buy some fidget rings, whatever it is. So it's just, kids don't know. I mean, adults don't really know anymore either. That is its own whole separate thing. But to your point, yes and yes. So speaking of in the school and parenting, I'm curious if there are a few things that you see educators or parents doing that are maybe very well-meaning, but they're misguided, and that they end up backfiring in helping their teen or the teen they're working with move forward. And maybe what would be more effective than that? I don't know if there's any little tidbits that you could give us.
Yes. So, it kind of goes along a little bit with what we've been talking about with the spectrum. But so what I see with a lot of parents doing is they either overschedule their child, like their teen. So their teen, from the time they get home until the moment they go to bed, they are just like booked nonstop. Or on the flip side, they don't have enough structure or scheduling in place at all. And what happens in both of those ends of the spectrum is that teens don't get the opportunity to get curious. Like they don't have the time or space to explore what they might be curious in or what they're passionate about. I see parents where, on the overstructured side, again, it's very well intentioned because they're like, I want my teen to have things to do so that they're meeting people and they're not on their phone all day. Or they don't have any structure at all because they're thinking, well, they have so much going on at school. It's so stressful, or they're really anxious. So we want to find some middle ground because we know that some structure is actually really good for teens. We don't want the whole afternoon or their whole day off to just be completely open. We do want some structure in there. But then we also want to make sure that they have some space and time to explore things and to, see what they might be curious in or passionate about, because that's going to help them create their purpose. And so helping them have that middle ground balance of giving them that time and space, but then making sure it's not like wasted just scrolling. Because if you just give them all the time and space to explore their curiosities, it can't be, okay, well, now they're just going to be on their phone in their room for 6 hours.
Right. 6 hours. That might be, it might be more than that. So, okay. Can we take it to the next level? So now we've decided that, let's say that we really haven't been scheduling the weekends at all, and they're not currently in sports. And so, yeah, weekends might be, sleep in and then stay on their phone till we drag them out of bed for dinner. Do you have any recommendations for starting that conversation with the teen? Because I think the very first thing they're going to do, even if you say like, oh, you need some structure, or you need to get something done, or yada, yada, they're going to be like, I'm fine, leave me alone, whatever. And so I'm curious, do you have any recommendations of how to start moving your kid toward that? Let's say from the under schedule to having some structure and approaching that conversation with the teen.
Yes. So whenever a parent is approaching like a difficult or potentially difficult topic with a teen, I always encourage them to think of it as like you are coming into the conversation curious, and your job is just curious and with some observations. So you don't want to go in guns blazing, judgmental of all you do is lay in your room all day, because instantly the teen is just going to get defensive. It's going to turn into an argument. It's not going to work. But if you bring it up in a way where you're sharing some observations in a very non-judgmental way of something like, I've noticed, you're spending most of your weekends alone in your room on your phone. And then getting curious, like, how do you feel about that? Or is there something else you would rather be doing on the weekends? And so just to get some input from them. And I do know that having those kinds of conversations, sometimes it does require a certain foundation between the parent and teen to begin with, where your teen has to know that they can talk to you and that they can trust you. And so if that's not there, you may have to kind of go and start from that place first. But if you already have that foundation in place, and then you can get curious and you can ask these open-ended questions. And so maybe they say, well, yeah, I don't know what else to do on the weekends, or all my friends are busy. They all do blah, blah, blah. Then it's like, okay, so it sounds like you would like something to do, but you just don't know what to do, or you don't have people to spend time with. And so then once they validate that, then it's kind of like, okay, so would you be open to me helping you figure this out? And so now they're saying that they want to participate in it, or they want help with it, because now you're getting some buy-in from them. And then if they're open to that, then let's say it's because all their friends are busy. And so then it might be brainstorming the friends who don't have stuff going on the weekends, or maybe it's expanding the friend group. And like, what does that look like to expand the friend group, or to start hanging out with different people? Or maybe it's going places where you could meet more people. And so now you're still opening it, and you're gently kind of going into it. You're not going in like, okay, now we're going to schedule your entire weekend and this is what you're doing. You're kind of gently transitioning and adding new things for them.
I love that. And I'll add something that I see, and I'm sure, I'm curious if this is something that you also recommend for parents, because I feel like the other half of that is like staying calm and regulated as a parent in those moments, because we're frustrated by the time we go to them. But one thing that I've noticed, both with the kids that I work with, and especially the older kids and my own teenagers, is that they will often reject my idea in the moment. And they'll say, I'm fine with staying in my room all day. I'm fine with only hanging out with one person. But then once I have planted the seed, if I can stay calm in the moment and they're not defensive when I'm delivering my suggestion or my question, that then later, without admitting that they agree with me, they will start to put those things into place. And so I think that's just another nudge for what you're saying, another support for that. And I'm curious if that's part of this as well for you.
Yes, that is 100% true. I cannot tell you how many times I have had teens say things to me where, because I work with their parents too, and I know their parents, I literally can hear their mom's voice. Like, I know they are repeating to me verbatim what their mom has said to them. And now they've internalized it. And all I can think is like, oh my gosh, your mom would be so proud if she just heard this. I don't say that, but that's what I'm thinking, because I know they have internalized something that their mom has said. And you are planting a seed. You are bringing something up to just get them to think about it, because that's what I mean when I say, like, you're not trying to get them to just completely change everything. Sometimes it's getting them just to think about things a little bit differently. Because now if you planted the seed and they're starting to think about things differently, now they're going to start to create the change, but they might do it in a way that's a little bit different than you would do it. And that's okay, but they're still going about it. So yes, part of it is like kind of planting that seed and just kind of getting the ball rolling a little bit.
I'm divorced, and so my kids have two homes. I have a very good co-parenting relationship with their dad, but it's funny because once in a while, I will tell the kids something, they will push back on me, but then they'll go and tell him like, oh, mom said this and I'm going to do that, or vice versa. They'll say, well, dad had this great idea, I'm going to do that. And when I talk to him, he's like, they told me they hated that idea, and so it's like letting them carry the baton forward. And that's a very big challenge because we have our own opinions as parents or educators. So yeah, so I love your approach. I think that it's accessible to people that maybe aren't necessarily sure. And sometimes we're not sure, right? We go to our kids and we're like, we're not sure what the answer is, but sort of just opening the discussion. I like what you said, going to them with observations and curiosity. I think that that's huge. We'll go a long way. I love that. So if we're thinking about your book and your coaching, who is the best candidate for it, right? So like you've talked about everything from like people that really need mental health treatment, like all the way up through people who are really trying to decide what college is right for them. Who's sort of the ideal parent to read the book or student to come for coaching with you?
The best parent for this book is just any parent who's sick of arguing with their teen. So a parent who feels like they're just constantly lecturing, constantly getting into arguments, trying to get their teen interested in something or to follow through on something, then this book really will be helpful. You'll find whether it's the drive, the grit, or the goals, there's going to be some value in there for you for sure. And then as far as the teens that I work with are typically teens who are lacking some motivation, who aren't really sure what they want to do with their lives. They feel a lot of pressure. They compare themselves a lot to other people, either on social media or in their real life, feel like they're not doing enough and just really don't know what direction to go and feel kind of lost. And then the parent feels like ill-equipped to support them, or even feels like they just need someone outside the house to help them because maybe the parent is great in giving them all of the best advice and suggestions, but because it's coming from a parent, it's just not landing, or it's kind of changing the dynamic. So those tend to be the people I work with the most.
Awesome. So I feel like most people listening are going to, nod and agree with the things that you're saying. Are there any unpopular opinions that you feel really strongly about that you're putting out into the world with your work that you would like to get the message out about?
Well, that's a good question. I've never been asked that before. An unpopular opinion. So I don't know if this would be unpopular. It's not something you see people talking about a lot, but I strongly believe that success is a very individualized thing, and we all define success differently. And so what looks like success to you, it might not for me. And that's the same thing for teens and young adults. They can define success very differently than their parents. And so when I work with teens, I'm trying to figure out what it looks like to them. And then how do we now create the roadmap to get to that version of success? And that might not be very popular with the parents because the parent may have a very different version. A parent may think like, no, they need to be crossing items off on the list and they need to be following this very clear path. And that's not what I'm going to be doing with their teen. But the parents who do come in and work with me, they learn that very quickly. And so they know it's not like I'm doing anything secretly or anything like that. Here's an example. I had a girl come to me when she was, I think, a junior in high school. And literally the reason for referral was because she told her high school counselor that she wanted to be a librarian. And the parents did not think that that was a good enough career. And so they wanted her to work with me to help her find a career where she could like make more money and it would, be higher status. And so I just told them, I said, that is not what, do not hire me. That is not what I will do. I will help her figure out if being a librarian is something she truly wants to do. If that's a good fit for her, then I'm going to help her figure out how to do that. And the parents were kind of reluctant of like, okay, well, we'll just see and see how this goes. And they ended up making a total, 180 switch in like their mindset. And it ended up being a great thing for the whole family. But that was an example of like, I'm not going to just dive into what you define as success and then get her to go in that direction.
Yeah, I would imagine similar to some therapy situations, the parents are bringing their kid and it's like, fix my kid, when in reality, it's not the kid that needs any fixing here. So yeah, I love that. That's great. So one other kind of complicated topic when it comes to teens is in our attempts to bridge relationships with teens, either in work settings or at home, what are teens doing but playing on the edges of like what is socially acceptable, sometimes what is legal? And so I'm curious if you have any recommendations for parents on how, or people working with teens on how to navigate if you hear discussions about, let's say, drugs or alcohol. That's another area where I see parents struggling a lot with, what do we allow? What do we, I mean, condone is its own whole separate conversation, but what do we let slide and what do we come down hard on? Because like abstinence only education is poor. It's, that's not successful. But I'm curious, how does a parent, let's say they do have a kid who generally is headed in the right direction, but they know their kid is dabbling in this or that. Like, how do you recommend, or do you have a recommendation about that?
Yes. It's funny. I recently created, and your listeners can find it just on my website at destinationu.net, but I have a super guide for parents for the teenage years. And so I literally will, conversations around sex, around vaping, around drugs, lying, sneaking out, guidance for each of those things. So for parents who do want like almost like a script on what to say and how to have those conversations, I do have that resource there under super guides on my website. But yes, those conversations. So first, earlier when I was talking about that foundation of being able to talk about things with your teen, it does require a certain foundation. This is where that foundation is really important, because if you have a relationship with your teen where you're able to ask open-ended questions from a place of curiosity, it doesn't matter around drugs, around sex, whatever, like that is really important, because you want your teen to be able to share with you if they are dabbling or if they're thinking of doing something. You want them to know that they can tell you that, and you're not going to jump to some overreaction of like, oh my God, you're going to throw your whole future down the toilet, or you're going to end up homeless, or you're going to become addicted. If you have that overreaction, all they've just learned is, okay, mom's not somebody I can talk to about this. And now that means they're going to go talk to probably a peer and get way worse advice and guidance. That is not what you want. You want them to feel like they can come to you. So when you do feel like they're dabbling, or maybe they've shared a little bit, approach it with curiosity, asking these open-ended questions of like, well, how did it feel? So let's say that they told you that they smoked weed, so well, how did it make you feel when you did it? How did you feel the next day? Or what do you think prompted you to do it? Like, were you doing it because you were curious? Were you doing it because you felt pressure because everyone else was doing it? And just kind of get some insights into like what was driving them to do it. And then you can ask, well, now that you've had some time, maybe you tried it on Friday and it's Tuesday, like now what do you think about it?
Mm-hmm.
And so again, it's like you're getting information from them, you're getting curious. So now you can see, because if they're telling you, yeah, I just did it because like all of my friends were doing it and I didn't know how to say no, and I got really paranoid and it was awful. Then you can say, okay, well, it sounds like you don't really want to try it again. Do you want some help figuring out how to navigate those situations? And then you can help them kind of come up with a script on how to like avoid those situations or how to get out of them. I've had teens where they will literally they have like an emoji, like a cue emoji that they'll send their parent that means you're going to call me right now and pretend like you have to come get me. Yeah, like those are great. Like you can have something like that with your teen, but you can help them decide what's the best fit for them.
Mm-hmm. And probably I would imagine if you come at it from that approach, that if they're, let's say they say, yeah, it was fine and I liked it. And if you come at it from you approach with curiosity and ask about their experience in it, you could probably better go back to them later and say, I heard you out and I realize this is your decision at the end of the day, but these are my concerns about this. I would imagine that creates a a much more solid, like you were talking about, foundation for that conversation.
Absolutely. And if like, let's say they do love it and they're like, yeah, I really liked it. It was so much easier for me to talk to people and I felt like I belonged. Then you could say like, okay, so it sounds like being able to communicate easily with your friends and feeling like you belong. It sounds like maybe that's something that isn't always there. And now you found something that helps. But let's see if we can figure out some other things that can help if weed isn't always available. And so again, you're not framing it as because I don't want you to do it, of just like, well, you can't always smoke weed in order to feel like you belong. So let's find some other ways to help you feel like you belong too.
Yeah. Thanks for digging into that topic. As the kids get older, the questions get realer. And so, I live in Wisconsin where cannabis is not legal, but like all of the states around us, it is legal for adults. And so it just has created, more complex conversations with the kids because it isn't as black and white as just saying like, oh, well, it's not legal. It creates more nuanced conversations. And so I appreciate you digging into that topic with me because it's a tricky one.
It is. And, when I talk to teens about it too, one thing I do tell them is just from like a neuroscience perspective to think about how their brain isn't completely developed yet. And so any type of substance is going to have an impact on a developing brain. And so I'll always tell them, like, if you want to do it, maybe wait until your brain is completely developed. Mm-hmm. Because one thing that they've found is that people who smoke like marijuana earlier in life, they develop ADHD like symptoms later in life, like usually in like their 40s. And so they're finding a connection there between those two things. And so while it's not like smoking, it's going to make you develop schizophrenia or, something really wild, but it does create ADHD symptoms. And so you're going to have problems like paying attention and with impulse control in your 40s. And so maybe, just to kind of like give them a little bit of like that educational background on it, sometimes that helps too.
That's great. So I want to swerve a little bit here. And, you're an author and you run your own business. And you can be the best coach, the best therapist, the best author in the world. But if you aren't also running a very solid business behind that, you're not going to get anywhere with that. Every person who makes it as far as you have is also great at the back business end. And so I'm curious if you have any recommendations for someone who is really dedicated to youth well-being and they care a lot about it. They have skills on a topic within the field and they're curious about making it a career. Do you have any advice for someone who wants to start their own business or make their passion a career within the field of youth well-being?
100%. I would say my number one piece of advice is to either get a coach or find a community. That makes a huge difference because if you don't have that business background or that business understanding, you might be great with teens and great at coaching, but you're going to need someone to help you figure out the infrastructure or to figure out whether it's like digital products or physical products or how to scale or how to package your coaching options to help you figure that out and help you really look at the numbers. So having either a coach that can help you navigate that or a community of other entrepreneurs or founders or similar kinds of business-minded folks where you can get those resources and that support. That's something that I did. I was on my own because I started my own private practice back in 2015. And then I went completely online in 2019, actually literally in January. And then the pandemic hit and I was like, whoa, that was good timing.
Yeah. Wow.
It was around 2019 when I decided to join a community. And that was something I wish I would have done in 2015 when I was just, had everything on QuickBooks and was kind of figuring it out. Now I've learned so much since then from my community.
Awesome. Well, congrats on 10 years of business ownership. That is huge. That is wonderful. All right. My last question for you is one that I ask at the end of every episode. And that is, if you could wave a magic wand on behalf of kids in 2025, what would you wish for them? And what messages would you tell them?
Oh, that's a good question. On behalf of kids, I would wish, oh gosh, it's like I just go immediately to their phone. I would wish that they would have more opportunities to figure out passions and purpose. And so whether that looks like time and space away from phones, connecting with others, and just being able to do different activities. Because I think when they have passions and purpose, it makes all the other stuff so much easier, developing the grit, creating the goals. And then I think that's just good for the world when we all have something that we're passionate about or something that's aligned with a purpose.
Well, I love that. And I think the work you're doing is going to help accomplish that magic wand wish by helping kids figure out their passions and then figuring out how to get there. And so I'm grateful that you are out there doing the work that you're doing. It sounds incredible. I am personally interested in your work, and also I know that our community will be as well. So thank you so much for sharing so many great tidbits and your expertise with us. If people want to find out more or reach out to you about coaching or find your books, where's the best place for them to do that? And we'll link everything in the show notes.
Yes, the best place is to go to my website, which is destinationyou.net. So that's destinationyou.net, and it has my books, my coaching. You can contact me. It has all my social media links on there too as well.
Awesome. Well, we will link everything. Thank you again, Dr. McNally. It was truly wonderful to talk with you. I'm grateful for the work you're doing and excited to see what's next for you, see what your next book is.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me.
Yes, of course. And to all the listeners, thank you for following along. We will be back next time with another inspiring interview. In It for Youth is a Lit Path Studios production. Music is by Inspiring Audio and Pond 5. Be sure to subscribe so you don't miss an episode. And to learn more about this show and all other shows on the network, visit www.litpathstudios.com.